What's up, guys? It's Alex, and today talk about a subject that has been talked about so much that it gets redundant. But every new model year, the same subject comes up, and this time I think I'm forced to talk about it because I think people need a clear understanding about cold air intakes. Okay, how they work, what their function is. Now, a lot of you guys know this shit already. So if you know about cold air intakes and you're a freaking genius, bypass this video, go watch Cletus jump off a cliff or try to clear the Grand Canyon. Go ahead and do that. But for the rest of you that really want to know something, you know, about cold airs, this video's for you. So 2018 came out, and of course, what happens? Manufacturers get out there and they want to start making parts for this car right away. They're like, all right, and what's the first thing, one of the first modifications you guys do to a 2018 Mustang or newer model vehicle? Cold air. Why? Because more air equals more power, right? Well, let's talk about this for a bit, okay? Take a real close look at how Ford, who spent millions of dollars designing every little part on this car, designed this cold air intake. If you look at it closely, it's actually a little bit bigger than 2015 to 2017 Mustangs. Just for comparison's sake, I have a 2015 cold air right here versus the 2018 cold air. If you look closely, the housing is quite bigger on the 2018 version than the 2015 version. And if you look at the tubes, way different, like a lot different. The 15 and up cold air is not nearly as robust and thick as the 18 version. Well, why is that? Well, obviously this car has more compression. It makes a good chunk more power than the Gen 2 or the Gen 1. So Ford thought it adequate to make the cold air simply bigger. Again, they kept the same exact design. Look, kept the same exact design, except the housing where the mass airflow sensor sits is bigger. I can measure it and give you all the scientific data on the planet, but I'll let your eyes do the comparison. It is actually quite a bit bigger. Now, if you look at the ducting, how everything works inside of a cold air, well, again, it sucks it through this little snorkel and it goes sideways. For those of you that, let me try to extend this guy and see if I can get in there and give you a good shot of where it's grabbing air from. See right there? It's pretty intricate ducting that goes to the front of this guy, okay? And that goes into the airbox, okay? It goes whoop into the airbox, up through that filter, and I guess that would be the biggest restriction you'll have. Then again, it's shielded, not actually causing any engine bay heat to actually get up in there. And then the mass airflow sensor, after about a 3.5 or 4 inch run, is a nice straight clean signal. Then they make it, you know, flexible, the tube, all that stuff. But again, for the 18 model year, they just went bigger. Now, you make this guy 120 millimeter and make this tube the same, let's say 120 millimeter or so, couple it to the stock one way or another, or make your own tube. I think that's a winner. Honestly, that's a winner, and I think it'll do really well, unless you go Cobra Jet. Cobra Jet, in my opinion, you need an open air element, all the air on the planet. If you can shield the filter somehow, that's the way to go. But for the 90% of you that are not going to get a Cobra Jet intake, in my opinion, a stock cold air or something very close to a stock cold air is the ticket when it comes to modifying or not modifying your new Mustang. So what happens when an aftermarket manufacturer builds a cold air for you? First thing they do is they put an open air element. They bypass all of this stuff, they render it useless, they make a shield, then they put an open air element here, then the sensor is in a similar place, then they have a nice curved tube to go to the throttle body. Well, what happens 100% of the time? An open air element will cause the car to have higher IATs at idle and bumper to bumper driving than a stock one. So a lot of the times people say, hey Alex, I installed a blah 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 cold air and my IATs are 120, 130. I've seen as high as 155 degrees on a log. I said, dude, why is your car 155 degrees at idle? He's like, well, I was on the staging lanes at the track and you're creeping, and sometimes on street night, every Honda and their mom wants to come out and race, and then you're basically idling the car all the way up to the line, And then when you go to launch the car, your IATs are at 155 after the burnout, especially after the burnout. And they only start to go down when you're rolling down the track. When you're 3/4 of the way down the track, they start to get ambient, and then your car starts to make halfway decent power. Well, how do we combat that? Well, I'm not gonna tell you that cold air intakes are not worth it. If you're roll racing, I know. If you're out there roll racing and you're already going 50, 60 mile an hour, 40 roll, 60 roll, you're probably going to see, you know, pretty cold intake air temperatures, or at least ambient plus minus 6 to 10 degrees, depending on how hot your engine bay runs. If you have headers and all that stuff. So in that case, the car should make more power than a stock cold air. Like 9 times out of 10, it should make more power if you're already rolling. But the problem is, a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people think it's a cold air intake, I should have hotter air than stock. Actually, yes, you do. Look at how it's designed. Okay, there are no metal parts in this guy. The only metal parts are the clamps. The airbox is highly engineered, and it is drawing air from a very well engineered ducting area. So if you have an open air element that measures bigger and the hood is closed, that's the other thing, guys, because when you see horsepower comparisons, the hood is open. And where is the filter, the open air element filter, drawing air from when the hood is open? All this, wow, you know? So in my opinion, cold air manufacturers should test their cold air intakes with the hood closed and develop some kind of intricate ducting, or at least a nicer way of getting the cold air in there. Now, if you're going to ask me which cold air is the best, I'm not going to tell you brands, because all that does is open me up for companies trying to get me fired, which is like a trend nowadays. So what I say is this: find a cold air manufacturer that looks as close to stock as possible. If not, keep it stock. If your car is mildly modified, meaning a tune, E85 and headers, keep the stock cold air. But if you're out there trying to really ring it out, you do some weight reduction, you got a Cobra Jet intake or a Boss intake manifold or something aftermarket, then yes, you have to go with an open air element type, and you have to find a way to shield the hot engine bay temps from the cold air, because your IATs will go up. That is guaranteed. IATs will go up. Now, in my opinion, the best cold air on the planet would be something that looks exactly like this, with a free-flowing filter, and this housing be about 115 to 120 millimeter. If a cold air manufacturer went and said, guys, we've developed something that utilizes the stock ducting intake, the intake air system, but the filter flows more, the housing is bigger, and the tube is similar to this, because this is actually really well made, that's the cold air intake that I would go after. But honestly, when I tell people, hey Alex, when they ask me, hey Alex, what cold air intake do you recommend? I say, what do you got done in your car? This and this. What do you use it for? Well, I daily drive it. It's my only car, and I go to work back and forth, and once in a while I go to track nights. I'm like, dude, keep the stock cold air in it. If you have a Cobra Jet intake, you need an aftermarket cold air, but the Ford Racing version is really tough to beat. And you need an open air element filter when it comes to open air element cold air intake, when it comes to a Cobra Jet intake, because there are no other options. So in my opinion, and again, I preface this by saying in my opinion, in case companies go out there and try to hit up my employer and say, your employer's talking shit about my company. No, this is my opinion. In my opinion, I think you should keep the stock cold air if the car is very mildly modified. If you do want to buy an aftermarket cold air, understand you're going to have higher IATs at idle and bumper to bumper traffic. It's just going to happen, especially if you live in a hot state like Florida, Texas, Louisiana. It's going to be hotter, period. Don't expect the cold air intake to be colder than the stock one, the IATs anyway, because you have an open air element filter, and that's just common sense in my opinion. It's simply just common sense that tells you hood closed, open air element filter, bumper to bumper traffic, your IATs will be higher, period. Hopefully it's helped some of you guys understand out there, but some of you geniuses out there that know all this information, otherwise you can ignore this video. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you later.